Welcome to episode 1 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I am your host, Matt Harmon, joined in studio by my co-host and good friend in podcasting, the one, the only, John Sloat.
Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a brisk, sunny January day.
It's beautiful out, isn't it?
Not something that's especially common here in the Nona.
Yeah, so we don't get a lot of sun.
We don't.
But it's nice when it's here.
It is. It's very nice. And it is refreshing. We're starting a new semester here at Grace, and that's in part the start of this new podcast, the Various and Sundry podcast. If you've not listened to episode 0, we'd refer you to that as sort of a preview episode. And I guess this is sort of the first official episode 1 of the podcast. And so we certainly wanted to thank those who've already listened to the episode 0. And if you want to get in touch with us, interact with us, we'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Twitter. The podcast Twitter feed is V&S Pod.
Mm-hmm. At VNS Pod.
VNS Pod. And then each of us have our own individual Twitter feeds as well. I'm at Doc Harmon, and you are?
At John_Sloat, S-L-O-A-T.
Excellent. And of course, we do have an email address as well. If you'd like to email the podcast, that is simply various and sundry podcast, all straight together, at gmail.com. So, if you want to give us some feedback or
if you have a topic you'd like us
to
discuss, we'd be happy to discuss those things.
Yeah. So I think the place to start is, since it's been almost a month. Not quite, maybe 3 weeks since we recorded the preview episode.
I think that was December 9th.
Okay,
we dropped that. Yeah.
Almost a month.
Almost a month.
So a lot has happened in the sports world since that point.
Yeah. Probably most notably, the college football playoff began.
That is true. Yes, it did.
And how would you like to discuss your Buckeyes right now?
Well, it's. I'll start with just saying it was a disappointing end to the season. I think that Ohio State, although they didn't demonstrate it on the field, which is what ultimately matters.
Sure.
I think they were a better team than Clemson.
Okay.
Because I think despite the fact Ohio State did not play well and made several mistakes along the way, they were still in position to win the game. And to me, the most disappointing piece is not the officiating, which we can get to in a minute.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up. Yeah.
But I think not finishing drives, the first 3 drives, we had 3 drives in the first half that got into the red zone, and we didn't score touchdowns. Kicked field goals.
Sure, yeah.
2 of them were dropped passes by our running back, J.K. Dobbins, who is spectacular. He finished, I think, second all-time in Ohio State rushing history. So he's a great, historically great Ohio State running back.
And remind me if I'm wrong, or correct me if I'm wrong, but he came out at the beginning of the second half, right, with some kind of injury, and that certainly didn't help things.
Correct. He had some sort of ankle injury. They took him back in the locker room, taped him back up. Who knows if they shot him with cortisone or what, but he came back out still a little hobbled, but played phenomenally. Rushed for, I can't remember, had like 170 yards of rushing, had some receiving yards as well, but he had 2 killer drops in the first half that cost us touchdowns. So that's disappointing. But, at the end of the day, I think most Ohio State fans are going to remember 2 officiating calls. One was the targeting on Shaun Wade, which
that's a big call.
When he tackled Trevor Lawrence in the pocket, called for targeting, which I think probably by the letter of the rule as it's written is probably an okay call, though it's a terribly written rule and needs to be completely rethought. The killer, though, was the fumble that was recovered, run back for a touchdown by Ohio State that was overturned on replay.
Yeah, that was bad. That was definitely a catch.
And the frustrating thing, I think, for me is the fact that there is no definition of indisputable that covers that overturn. Because that's supposed to be the standard, right? Indisputable video evidence that a call is wrong and needs to be reversed. That was not even close to indisputable evidence that needed to be reversed. And I think even if it had gone the other way live, indisputable, probably not. I think that's probably one of those that whatever the call in the field,
it needs to stand.
Probably needs to stand. And when you had multiple officials, like not working the game, but like on Twitter coming out, like years of experience saying that's a bad reversal. That's not indisputable.
2019 was the year of bad officiating, it feels like.
Yeah. And it even continued into NFL playoff weekend here this past weekend. It's been all throughout the NFL season, the college football season, the lack of consistency in what constitutes pass interference, or even just whether you overturn something or don't overturn something. It's bad.
Well, and the year started with the Saints' non-pass interference call that added this rule to the NFL that's just been difficult to enforce.
Yes.
Very inconsistent, and nobody's been happy. I don't think the officials are happy. I don't think the players are happy. The fans certainly aren't happy.
And part of what's ironic is the Saints playoff game this weekend ended with the Vikings catching a touchdown pass, Kyle Rudolph in the end zone. When you look at the replay, he clearly pushed off. Now, whether it rises to the level of that should be pass interference or not, that I suppose that could be debatable. But the fact it happened in New Orleans, and they didn't even review it, when the reason that you can review pass interference is because of a call that wasn't reviewed last year in New Orleans. The fact they didn't even bother to review that is staggering to me.
Yeah, it's
staggering.
And
I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not, saying the NFL is out to stick it to the Saints or anything. But the whole reason they put in the rule that you can review pass interference is because of a call in New Orleans last year. And now you have an overtime playoff game that ends where you would think they would at least look at that as a potential.
Well, just to throw the Saints a bone, just to, hey, we really screwed up last year.
Yeah.
Here's our, we're gonna hand you one.
Totally.
It was a blown call, or at least that should have been reviewed this year. Last year was certainly a blown call.
Absolutely.
And so that's sort of been the theme. I think that's the name of 2019, year of our Lord, year of terrible officiating.
Yes, indeed. But there was some good news from the NFL playoff weekend this past weekend here.
Yeah, the Patriots lost.
Yes, Voldemort died.
Yeah.
And, lots of discussion as to whether that's the last time we'll see Tom Brady in a Patriots uniform.
Yeah, Brady throws a pick six.
And he ends it with a pick six.
It's lovely.
It was a beautiful thing. Yeah. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens this upcoming weekend. It's just nice to have the Patriots out of the playoffs.
I know it's some variance, a little bit of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we move on from the sports, though, I feel like we have to do at least a sort of post-mortem on the Jets season. Yeah,
the Jets are bad. Have been for better part of a decade. But I think the hardest part as a sports fan is when your team finishes sort of in the middle of the pack, and particularly what happened with the Jets this year, where they started so poorly. I think they were 1-5, 1-6, and then finished the season really strong. So you end up in the middle, but the games at the end of the year that you're winning aren't worth anything.
Yeah,
and
you could argue actually hurt the franchise at some level because it worsens your draft pick position.
Right. Well, but you know what? If we're in the top 10, we're taking a defensive lineman. That defensive lineman is going to be good enough to get a brand new contract and then be terrible the following season, and we'll trade them away. We've done it for Muhammad Wilkerson. We did it for Sheldon Richardson. We'll probably do it for the guy we drafted last year. I can't remember who. And we'll probably get rid of Jamal Adams too at some point, because that's just what we do. So, yeah.
You good with keeping Adam Gase?
No, but I don't actually get any say. I heard he said this week to one of the players on the team, "What do you do with all this criticism of you?" He goes, "I'm just rich. I don't care."
Nice. Okay.
So lovely human, lovely person.
Yeah. Okay. That's good.
I am excited about a new GM, Joe Douglas, but other than that, and that's mostly because he hasn't screwed up yet. So we'll see what happens in the coming weeks. It's a new year, Matt. It's a new year.
It is.
We're looking forward to baseball season. Here comes baseball season.
Well, you're going to have to carry us because you know me well enough to know I follow playoff baseball. Like pennant race down the stretch, I'll pay attention to, but regular season.
I'm all about the daily grind.
So
all about the daily grind.
Yeah,
for baseball.
you're going to have to carry our water when it comes to that.
Well, speaking of a new year, something that people get into, not me, but something that people get into is making New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
So I've already shown my hand a little bit on New Year's resolutions, but why don't you talk about New Year's resolutions a little bit? Do you have any? Do you make them?
I don't make New Year's resolutions. I'm not anti them. I just find them fascinating in some ways. That they are a sort of cultural phenomena.
Yeah.
That is that every year, late December, you get this sort of building momentum towards making New Year's resolutions. And so that just fascinates me more as a cultural phenomena than it does anything. And, it's, of course, it doesn't take a lot of research or even just, awareness to realize most of them don't stick. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's one of my complaints. One of my two complaints is that everybody has the same New Year's resolutions. I want to work out more. I want to eat healthier. Mm-hmm. I want to read more, or whatever it may be. Or something new that's popped up, and I saw this recently, is that they're just incredibly vague. Yeah. I want to love myself more, or I want to be more forgiving of myself, and I don't know what that means.
Right.
That sounds really empowering and
sure
nice, but what does that mean?
Yeah, and certainly hard to measure in any real sense typically.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and so I did a little digging and top 10 most common New Year's resolutions.
Oh, here we go.
So
wow, you're doing show prep?
That's not
fair.
Well,
okay.
And they tend to group very easily. Lose weight.
Yep.
Stop smoking. You didn't mention that one, but
not one I typically struggle with.
Stick to a budget. So something financial, right?
Sure.
Be a little bit more disciplined in how you spend your money. 4, save more money. So that's kind of sticking to the budget thing too. 5, find a better job.
Okay.
6, become more organized. Which typically takes a level of organization that you probably don't have to become more organized. So exercise more, of course. Be more patient at work with others. Yeah, all right, sure.
Okay.
Eat better. So again, there's that sort of personal health, I think, covers a lot of these, right? Mm-hmm. Exercise, eat better, etc. And then speaking to your point of the vagueness, number 10 was become a better person.
Yeah,
what does that even mean? But apparently, so these numbers are not going to surprise you, but only 30% of people who make New Year's resolutions manage to keep them into February.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah.
And 1 in 5, so 20%, manage to stay on track for 6 months. I think that's even probably high, to be honest.
How much was it again?
1 in 5, so 20%.
20%? That feels high to me.
6 months in are still on target.
Yeah, unless there's this really disciplined corner of the earth that I'm unfamiliar with. I think that sounds way high. Yeah.
Yeah. So, when we started thinking about this as a topic, I tossed out a sort of side topic related to this of, some people really get into New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
And when I think of resolutions, I think of a man named Jonathan Edwards. who sort of famous American preacher, thinker, was alive in the early 18th century.
Was probably one of the greatest American thinkers that
absolutely
that has lived. Probably.
Absolutely, and sort of on the back end of the Puritans when it comes to kind of situating him historically and theologically, but he didn't make New Year's resolutions. He just made resolutions,
and he starts them all with, or most of them at least, with resolved.
Yeah. He's an intense guy.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah.
And so he wrote a series of resolutions. I don't have the exact number here. It's something like 70 maybe. I don't have the article. I have rearranged them into topics, so that didn't help me.
Yeah, do you have the Desiring God?
Yeah.
One? Yeah, Desiring God has a great list of them, and they're organized by topic. Really easy to read and look at, and they've done it in a really pleasing way.
Yeah, so the interesting thing is that Edwards wrote these when he was like 19 and 20.
Yeah.
And if we're honest, when you read through them, I want to be gracious to Jonathan Edwards because I love Edwards. He's one of my favorite sort of historical thinkers and writers. But they come off a little bit intense.
Yeah. My personal favorite is resolution number 38.
Yeah, which was?
Resolved never to speak anything that is ridiculous, sportive, or matter of laughter on the Lord's Day.
Yeah, he's definitely
no jokes in those sermons.
A Sabbatarian in that sense, yes. I think at their best, when you look at these resolutions, it is a striking statement of his intention to live for the glory of God. Mm-hmm. And they are very much worth reading. So any sort of, we're not trying to throw shade at Jonathan Edwards here. Like in many respects, these are impressive. Like when you think about, these are written by a 19 and 20-year-old. There's a level of depth and sincerity and intensity that is deeply admirable.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also an aspirational, ooh, as I read through these, I go, oh my goodness, that one I've never quite thought of that in that specific way. That would be something worth emulating.
Yeah.
Now, others of them I look at and I go like, oh, I kind of do that, although I didn't write it down, nor did I say resolved beforehand.
Right.
But
yeah.
But yeah, I say lots of Christian people aspire to the things that are in here, even if they haven't spoken them this way.
Sure. And I think that as I reread these again, one of the things that struck me is the fact that Edwards, in several of these, talks about having that these resolutions are framed by the prospect of death. That there are a number of them where he says things like, this is number 7, resolved never to do anything which I should be afraid to do if it were the last hour of my life.
Yeah.
Now again, I can admire the intention behind that. That there's a sense of your life matters. We should live with death in view. All those are good things. But I don't know, I find myself thinking, if I knew I had an hour to live, there's probably only a handful of things I would even consider doing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that you can literally live that way.
Yeah.
So for example, even to put it in Edwards' context, if he knew he had an hour to live, would he go for a walk in the fields? Maybe he would, but maybe not.
Yeah.
So there are some things where that's a good thing. I just don't know that it makes the cut for if it's the last hour of my life, I would do that.
He also says number 9, just to really hit home his thinking on death, resolved to think much on all occasions of my own dying and the common circumstances which attendeth death.
Yeah.
He is incredibly motivated
yes.
by looking forward to his own death, which, if I'm being truthful and I'm being honest, I think that's a thought I regularly avoid.
Sure.
I avoid thinking of my own death. I avoid thinking of these
absolutely.
things.
And that's a particularly striking countercultural kind of resolution for our contemporary context. When you think about the fact that in Edward's day, they were surrounded by death. Mm-hmm. That death was common in the sense, I mean, death has always been common in one sense, obviously. Like death's been around forever, right?
Sure.
but in our culture, we often are insulated from it. I mean, I've never asked you this question, I guess, but have you ever been in the presence of someone when they actually died?
No, I don't think like the moment of death, but near the moment of death.
Yeah.
So I've had some situations where I've been around people who are very, very, very close
Yeah.
to death, and one situation where they may have been dead and I'm just not aware, but no, never in the room.
Yeah. I've only experienced it once, and in one sense it was not intentional. We went to visit a friend in the hospital, and he providentially passed away while we were actually there.
Yeah.
So we weren't going there. We were going there thinking we were going to visit him and his wife and provide comfort, encouragement, and when we got there, we were in the room, and it was like,
moment.
like he is passing away. But I bring that up because when you think about it, we live in a culture where we're always separated from death, right? People go somewhere else to die.
Sure.
Usually,
sure.
Right? But in Edward's day, like, people died in their homes. Like, if they were sick, they weren't like in a nursing home. They weren't in hospice care.
Sure.
Like, they died in their bedroom or in the living room, so that you grew up around death in a very real, tangible sense. Today, we don't do that.
Yeah. What are, goodness, and this is totally on the fly, so good luck. What's the benefit of regularly thinking about death? Like why did Edward see this as a really excellent thing to be thinking about?
I mean, I do think at its best, it helps us keep a sense of priorities in the sense of not wasting our life in frivolous things. And that doesn't mean that you can never, that you always have to be doing something intensely serious. But I think it also, I think instead of preparing for death, we tend to avoid the subject, or we tend to try to numb ourselves to it. And so I actually started reading a book. I need to pick it back up again. But there's a recent book by, I think the author is Matthew McCallum.
Wow, you didn't finish a book?
Well, I've started it. The jury's still open.
Boy, you always finish books. I'm always the one that's like, I got halfway through and I stopped.
I paused. I didn't give up on it. I give up on occasional books. It's called Remember Death. And basically his whole point is we don't think enough about our own death, and that should shape a little bit of how we live in terms of setting priorities, and even just a pursuit of holiness, and thinking about, at death, we stand before a holy God and have to give an account for our lives. So I think that's probably the way that would benefit. But in terms of the resolutions, I think the one that I love the most, and this is definitely something that Edwards did live up to, is number 28. Resolved to study the Scriptures so steadily, constantly, and frequently, as that I may find and plainly perceive myself to grow in the knowledge of the same.
Yeah.
And that, to me, transitions to something that may not be a resolution, but it's common around the end of a year to see believers talk about, I want to read the Bible more in the next year.
Sure.
So Bible reading plans, and even Gospel Coalition has come out with a program. I forget the specific name of it. It's
I think it's just Read the Bible.
Read the Bible in 2020. And that's great. So I think that maybe that might transition us to less on it seems to me both of us are less on the resolution end of things and more on the let's set goals.
Yeah, and I think I think more on the cultivating good habits over even setting goals, because I think of goals, they need to be specific, obtainable, trackable, all the things you want goals to be. But when you cultivate a habit, it's something that you do regularly to something that you do regularly to make it a part of your life.
Yeah.
And so whether it's, I think reading scripture is much more making that a habit instead of a goal or a resolution. I want to read through the Bible this year. Well, I want to read through the Bible for the rest of my life, not just in the next year.
Sure.
But
even in the context of that, you would recognize and affirm the value of having some kind of plan in place, rather than just
willy-nilly flying around.
I want to read I want to read the Bible more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Like following some sort of plan, but not. I guess my point is saying, when you finish, you just keep going.
Right.
Cultivating that regular habit.
Right.
And so I read a book toward the end of 2019 called The Common Rule. Mm-hmm. I saw it on several people's best books of 2019 lists, so I picked it up real quick, read through it over the break, by Justin Earley, and he has 4 daily habits, 4 weekly habits, 4 monthly habits that I'm not going to adopt all of them, but I found lots of them really helpful. Mm-hmm. I really like that cultivating habit over necessarily making a resolution or even setting goals to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. Because I often think of goals as very professional things that I do at work. I set goals, numbers I want to hit, or
Sure.
calls I want to make, or pages I want to write, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But habits are things that I really want to infuse into my life that are regular.
Okay. So in light of that, do you have any particular sort of habits that you'd like to cultivate this year that you've targeted?
Well, I think reading scripture is a habit that regularly I'd like to cultivate. I think I read pretty regularly as a person, but I think reading bigger books, like I think I can be like, oh my goodness, that's 500 pages. I don't want to read that. But reading some bigger books in smaller chunks. So I've set aside some part of my morning this year to cultivate the reading of bigger books. Morning and evening prayer as well is another one that I'm trying to cultivate. So praying in the morning for the Lord to give me a work ethic, the desire to build a kingdom, and the evening prayer to be more of like a, Lord, I can't do it all, I desperately need you sort of prayer. Okay. Those are some things that I'm cultivating currently, as well as some things continuing from the past, exercise, eating habits, those sorts of things. How about yourself?
I think when it comes to mine tend to focus on the reading end of things. So I try to mix it up with reading scripture. Last year, I did reading through the New Testament in English, and then I read through the first 6 books of the Old Testament in the Septuagint in Greek over the course of the year. So trying to stretch myself in terms of reading Greek, reading a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
So very much enjoyed that. This year I'm keeping the New Testament piece in terms of English, but trying to bring a little bit more life back to my Hebrew. So a while ago I had started reading through the Psalms in Hebrew, and I kind of abandoned that. So I'm picking that back up. I think I'm in Psalm 39 right now. So it's slow going.
Yeah.
But I'm enjoying it, and it's proving fruitful. And I think those tend to be that, and then having some intentionality towards exercise is something that I'm trying to incorporate as well, without getting into this, I got to work out 3 days a week and I got to do this.
Sure.
So, but back to the books thing, both of us being avid readers usually get books for Christmas, and then that sort of begins to set the trajectory for our reading early in the year. Mm-hmm. So what books did you get for Christmas? And anything that you are like, I'm dying to read this?
So I got some books for Christmas. They're a little bit more collector than they're books I've already read. Mm-hmm. But I got the first 3 books of the Harry Potter series, fully illustrated.
Now, you've been asking for those for a while,
for like 3 or 4 years. Yeah, yeah.
And those are not cheap, which is part of why it's you haven't received them yet.
I think they're like 25 or 30 bucks a piece, but they are beautiful.
Yeah.
They're full text, and it prompted this conversation with my family. Like, oh, the first 3 books, yeah, those function more as children's books. When you get a little bit later on in the Harry Potter series, they function less and less like children's books.
Yeah, that's true. And there's a sense in which the series grows up with Harry.
Yes, and so
which is part of, I think, the brilliance of the series, to be honest.
Yes, and so how are you going to do the 7th book illustrated? First, it's super, super long.
Yes.
And then second,
super dark.
Super dark. And so I think they may have to get a new illustrator, or the illustrator's going to have to grow over the next several years in the painting. So that's one of the things I got. Other books I'm looking forward to reading early this year or at some point this year. Wisdom and Wonder by Abraham Kuyper.
Okay.
So it's a book on common grace in the arts and sciences. So I'm excited about that. I've started reading a book called The Madness of Crowds by Murray, a British philosopher.
Okay.
Really, really interesting stuff. So he's a kind of a neoconservative writer. Fascinating.
Okay.
Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
I've never read that one, so looking forward. I was at a conference this summer, Acton, and everybody was talking about this book. I was like, goodness, I've heard of it, but I've never read it. So picked it up.
It's not that long from what I remember. I've not read it. I just know.
No, I want to say
know
it's like
about
120, 150 pages, something like that. And then I picked up On the Road with St. Augustine by James K. Smith. So looking forward to reading through that as well.
Nice.
So how about yourself? Any good books?
Yeah, I got a few for Christmas that I'm very much eager to dig into. I've started one of them by T.D. Alexander, which you'd expect that to be a sports writer, right? I mean, perfect initials for that. But he's actually I believe he's Irish, an Irish biblical scholar.
Probably not an American football fan.
Probably not. But he wrote a book. Crossway does this series that's called Short Studies in Biblical Theology, which is super good. Great introduction to biblical theology themes at a very entry level, and so it's very good. So he wrote one called "The City of God and the Goal of Creation."
Okay.
So that I'm 2/3, 3/4 of the way. It's like 170 pages, so it's not that long.
So it's a pretty introductory sort of book to the topic. Okay.
Yep, very good.
Very nice.
Also in that series by Patrick Schreiner, The Kingdom of God and the Glory of the Cross. So looking forward to breezing through that as well. One that a little different take is a book by Ted Kluck called A Hard Thing on a Beautiful Day.
I'm excited to see how that goes. I have not read that. I don't own that.
A series of essays that he's written. Yeah. What's great about it is because it's a series of essays, it's easy to just sit down for 5 minutes and you read 1 or 2 essays, and then you can move on. It's not one of these books where
they're pretty short essays, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
A number of them are essays that are like newspaper articles that for a while he's written a column in, I think, the newspaper there in Jackson, Tennessee.
Oh, cool.
Where he lives as a professor at Union. And so, but they're organized around different themes. So like there's a whole section of sports, there's a section of pop culture, those kinds of things. And they're very well written, very engaging. So I've enjoyed that very much. I'm probably half to 2/3 of the way through it already.
Very cool.
And then the last one there is probably a book by Michael Kruger called Christianity at the Crossroads, How the 2nd Century Shaped the Future of the Church. So that's a book, based on what I can tell, I haven't started it yet, but where he's trying to look at how we got from the early church in the 1st century into the later church and developments of what orthodoxy is. And so I'm looking forward to digging into that. But we need to start moving towards the conclusion of our episode. But before we do that, we have to introduce essentially a new feature.
I know. I'm so excited about this.
Well, why don't you tell us about how this started?
So I listened to a Mets podcast that does this, and they do this with Mets baseball players. But I said, I don't know anybody else that does this, but name our episodes after an athlete that wore that number.
Okay. Yes.
And so you and I texted a little bit back and forth about what do we call episode 1?
Yeah.
Like, what athlete do we name this podcast episode after? And do you remember some of the names that were on the list? I remember a lot of hockey goalies is what I remember.
Yeah.
Which isn't going to resonate with either of us. I think I enjoy hockey maybe a little bit more than you do.
That's probably true.
I've been to several games. I love going. It's super enjoyable. But I'm not going to pick a goalie as like the athlete.
Yeah.
But we had a debate about two specific athletes.
We did.
And I conceded to your athlete because I think they're better. But I have a soft spot for my athletes.
So should we go with the honorable mention first?
The honorable mention or episode 101, if that were to come around.
We'll see.
I really wanted Pee Wee Reese, shortstop for the Brooklyn Dodgers, won a World Series from Kentucky, was a part of the teams with Jackie Robinson, helping break that color barrier in baseball. I mostly love him in the 42 movie. And he had he had a great career with the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Okay.
And then your athlete that won the day was?
Yes, Oscar Robertson.
And tell us about Oscar.
Well, I mean, he's arguably one of the 10 greatest basketball players of all time.
Quite good.
You can make the case that he's at least worthy of consideration of the top 10. And he was, when you think about the kind of numbers when it comes to points, rebounds, and assists, like the classic triple-double, that that we admire folks like LeBron or Russell Westbrook, guys that I believe was it Russell Westbrook that averaged a triple-double across the course of the season. Was that 2 years ago, I think?
2 or 3 years ago, yeah.
Well, before people were all whipped up about the category of a triple-double, like Oscar Robertson was doing them.
Yeah,
I mean, he was consistently scoring and rebounding and assisting at that kind of level. He was a bigger sort of guard / forward before that mold even existed, before there were guys like Magic Johnson, who was 6'9", playing point guard, or now LeBron James playing point with this year's Lakers at 6'9", or whatever we're listing him as. He was the prototype for that in an era where centers weren't even necessarily 6'8", 6'9", right?
Yeah. So
this is officially the Oscar Robertson episode. So we'll continue to do that throughout the course of the podcast here. But as we bring things to a close, we're going to try to close consistently with our one thing we liked.
Yeah, and it could be a book we're reading, it could be a podcast we're listening to, it could be just something that we're enjoying currently.
Could be a restaurant, could be
Totally. So why don't you lead off?
So I'm going to go with a podcast that I had forgotten that you had mentioned in the sort of secret episodes that will never air.
Yeah.
But I forget how. I don't know if I think I came across it through somebody else. But it's a podcast called 1865.
So good.
And you've listened to it, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
And it is. I didn't realize how long it was. But basically, the premise is it's a podcast that traces what happened. It starts basically with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in 1865.
Yeah.
As the Civil War is coming to a close, and then it moves into Reconstruction, which is an era of history that most of us as Americans just almost know nothing about. That our knowledge of the Civil War basically stops with Lincoln's death, and like, oh yeah, well we won the North won the war, right? And then it's like this big gap, and then it's like, oh man, all these racial issues are going on in the South, and it's kind of related to the fact that the Civil War didn't quite resolve all those, but there's this big void in there. And it really focuses on Edwin Stanton, who was Lincoln's Secretary of War at the time.
Secretary of War.
Basically the equivalent of Secretary of Defense today.
Sure.
And what's great about it is that it's historically reenacted, right? So it's dramatized, and these are top-notch actors who are doing the voices and the characters.
They're very good.
They're very good. But what I enjoy even more was the fact that after these episodes, they had an episode after each of these, where they had the producers talk about what's going on historically and why they chose and what they have good historical like grounding to say, we know this happened. And then we think this happened, and here's why we think, but others might disagree with us kind of things.
And lots of the things in the podcast that were shocking.
Yeah, that I had no idea happened.
I had no clue were absolutely true. Like Abraham Lincoln's son was dating or engaged to a woman who was in love with John Wilkes Booth.
Yes.
Which is insane to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
How does that happen?
I don't know. And then for me, another one of those like wow moments was Andrew Johnson, the vice president of the United States, was apparently with a prostitute.
Yeah, well enough that we know the name of that prostitute.
Correct.
Yes, that's verified.
The night that Lincoln was assassinated, and the Secretary of State, was it Seward? Was that his name?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah,
was also attacked.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that and somebody was sent to Andrew Johnson's room to kill him as well.
Correct. Yeah, so fascinating stuff. So if you're into history, and it's not hokey dramatization, like it's high quality.
Well done. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think that's been one of the benefits of podcasts coming along. It's
yeah.
brought back this radio drama medium that I feel like we've been lacking since the advent of the television.
Correct. And I didn't realize how long this was. So I started it right on my drive out of Winona Lake all the way out to Omaha and didn't finish it.
Yeah.
And then that took me on the way back, the rest of it from Omaha until like outskirts of Chicago. Like, so there's like, probably 18 hours in there, well, maybe not quite that much, like 16, 17 hours of content that's really, really good. So that was my one thing I liked. What about you?
So one of the things that dominated my Christmas break was robot vacuums.
Yes.
I got my parents one for Christmas, and my dad was pretty excited to program it. Mm-hmm. And my mom, I think, was a little bit more ho-hum. It was kind of like, well, we cleaned the house really well before you guys got here. It's probably fine. We ran it, and it filled up with dog hair. And they were like, oh, my gosh, we're living in filth.
Yeah.
And then when I returned, I had enough gift cards. I was like, I need to get one of these myself.
Yeah.
So purchased a robot vacuum. It's been fun to watch the vacuum run around the house and clean a bunch of things. And
they're great. They're great.
It's just putting a smile on my face at the moment.
As you know, my wife openly calls herself a robot vacuum evangelist.
Yeah. 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 They're wonderful.
Yes. Yeah. So, well, we've covered quite the ground here in episode 1, and we're
in a wide swath.
We need to certainly land the plane. So, we have done what we set out to do in this podcast to cover our various and sundry topics. And so, until next time, the Lord bless you all real good.
Later.